U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff and President Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner are set to meet with the Iranian delegation for negotiations in Geneva. This comes as the U.S. military has put together a show of force off the coast of the Middle East ahead of potential strikes in Iran. Let's go to Emma Withrow from the Fact Check team. And the world was watching here, Emma. The last time the U.S. struck Iran, it was targeted. We were talking brief strikes. What are analysts expecting here?
So different analysts have different perspectives, but Max Boot, who's a foreign policy analyst, he wrote a really interesting piece that was published by the Council on Foreign Relations, and he essentially argues the U.S. military is quietly signaling that a war with Iran could be a lot longer and a lot riskier than President Trump seems to think. He warns that Iran still has enough short-range and anti-ship missiles to hit U.S. bases and some of that Gulf oil infrastructure, which could spike global oil prices. Boot also stresses in this piece that a sustained campaign could quickly drain U.S. precision weapons, strain some already stretched forces, and pull some resources away from other global threats that are happening, all without really any guarantee that Iran would give in or that the U.S. would have a clear way out of this whole thing.
And looking back, for many of us, when we think invasion of Middle East, Saddam Hussein comes to mind.
Yeah.
Which defining moments stand out to you?
So the last time that the U.S. launched a true full-scale invasion, like you said, in that Middle East region was in Iraq in 2003. When U.S. forces went in, they toppled Saddam Hussein. They occupied the country for years. Since 2003, the U.S. has still used force in the Middle East, like in the fight against ISIS in Iraq and Syria starting in 2014, airstrikes in Yemen, and also there was those targeted operations against Iran-backed groups that happened. But those really haven't been full-scale invasions or formally declared wars. And just to put things into perspective here, to remind everyone, estimates from the Brown University's Cost of War say the Iraq War cost the U.S. more than $2 trillion, killed over 4,400 American troops, and wounded around 32,000. Also, it contributed to hundreds of thousands of Iraqi deaths. So devastating conflict. Obviously, no one wants to see something like that happen again.
Emma, thank you. Very true. And for more on this Fact Check team topic, including links to their sources, scan the QR code or visit thenationaldesk.com. President Trump's State of the Union address to Congress last night broke his own record for longest speech. He spoke for an hour and 47 minutes, yet only spent around 3 minutes speaking about Iran. Let's go to Emma Withrow from the Fact Check team. And I know that you spent the day pouring into and delving into those 3 minutes, roughly. Yes. The U.S. military, we know, has the largest show of military firepower off the coast of the Middle East since, I believe, 2003. Tell us more about the President's comments last night.
Sure.
Put that in perspective for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So President Trump basically said that Iran is still a serious threat, and he warned that they're trying to rebuild their nuclear program and missile capabilities. He also reminded people that the U.S. has already taken action against Iranian sites, but the job isn't finished, is what he said. And while Trump said he'd prefer a diplomatic deal, he made it clear that the U.S. would use force if Iran moves toward getting a nuclear weapon. Yeah,
giving a warning last night. If we look at the worst case scenarios, walk us through the potential players who could get brought in.
So from my understanding, a war with Iran wouldn't just be the U.S. versus Iran. Israel would almost certainly be directly involved, and countries like the U.K. and some Gulf states could potentially help with bases, logistics, or defense support. Iran, in turn, though, would rely heavily on its regional allies and proxy groups. Those are like Hezbollah, we're talking about Hezbollah here, militias in Iraq and Syria, and also the Houthis, which could spread fighting across the Middle East in different areas. Russia and China most likely wouldn't fight directly, but they could back Iran politically or economically, meaning the conflict would likely become a pretty broad regional war with global ripple effects.
Yeah, Emma, thank you. A little later on, Emma will be back to dig deeper into the potential scale of a war with Iran and what wars of this magnitude look like in years past.
Thank you for joining us. I'm Jan Jeffcoat. It is Thursday, February 26th, and this morning the White House calling on the Iranian regime to make a deal with the U.S. before it's too late. This comes as President Trump warns that Iran is developing missiles that he says could reach the U.S. At the same time, the Pentagon has deployed more of its most advanced and powerful fighter jets to the Middle East. We want to get right to Mark Boyle at the live desk following the very latest right now. Good morning to you, Mark. More nuclear talks did kick off overnight there in Switzerland. What can you tell us?
They are taking a brief pause, but that is going to resume soon. The goal here is to get a diplomatic peace deal done with Iran. If not, then a military conflict is possible for that Middle Eastern nation, Jan. In the past hour or so, U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner departed the indirect talks with Iranian negotiators in Switzerland. This is a break with more negotiations slated for later today. Part of today's talks are centered around a few things: Iran's ability to enrich uranium, and also this bullet point: what will happen to the existing stockpile going forward, because that's a big concern for the United States. The U.S. demands are simple. Iran cannot obtain a nuclear weapon, while Iran wants to continue to enrich.
Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. If they try to rebuild a nuclear weapon, that causes problems for us. And in fact, we've seen evidence that they have tried to do exactly that. So the president sending those negotiators to try to address that problem.
Now, apart from what's going on today, the White House also wants the deal to remain in effect indefinitely. Part of the reason President Trump ended the old nuclear deal with Iran was there was a clause inside that agreement where most of the limits on Iran's nuclear program would expire between 8 and 25 years. So ahead of today's talks, the U.S. put new sanctions on Iran, targeting ships that are accused of selling Iranian oil to help fund Iran's missile program. Updates on all of this as it breaks right here at the Live Desk.
I'm Atra El-Nashar in Washington. American and Iranian officials preparing for more nuclear negotiations in Geneva Thursday, part of President Trump's latest attempt to prevent Iran from developing a nuclear weapon. New comments by Trump and Iran's top diplomats show just how quickly a military conflict could break out. American and Iranian forces each positioned and ready as their leaders attempt to keep diplomacy alive.
When you are prepared for a war, you can prevent it.
That's Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi hours after President Trump told Americans this in his State of the Union address Tuesday night.
One thing is certain: I will never allow the world's #1 sponsor of terror, which they are by far, to have a nuclear weapon.
Iran's objective is to see economic sanctions lifted. But ahead of nuclear talks in Geneva Thursday, the Trump administration hitting Iran with more sanctions.
They want to make a deal, but we haven't heard those secret words: we will never have a nuclear weapon.
Iran has said it, though few outside the regime believe it. Iran's foreign minister posting Tuesday, "Our fundamental convictions are crystal clear. Iran will under no circumstances ever develop a nuclear weapon. Neither will we Iranians ever forego our right to harness the dividends of peaceful nuclear technology for our people." Tuesday afternoon on Capitol Hill, Secretary of State Marco Rubio briefed the Gang of Eight, lawmakers in leadership positions and top ranks on intelligence committees. Democratic leaders argue that as President Trump prepares his military options to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, his statements about U.S. strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities last summer don't add up.
Wait, what happened to Iran's nuclear program being completely and totally obliterated? Donald Trump's words, not our words. Clearly, he was lying to the American people, or he's lying right now.
President Trump making this new claim about Iran.
They're working to build missiles that will soon reach the United States of America.
A spokesperson for Iran's foreign ministry responding with, "Professional liars are good at creating the illusion of truth." A sign the regime is preparing for possible war, Iran has been loading oil onto tankers at an unusually rapid pace, according to a Bloomberg analysis. The U.S., meanwhile, sending F-22 fighter jets to Israel. In Washington, I'm Atra El-Nashar.